almost as exciting as the World Cup, where it seemed like the countdown was the thing that got people most excited. Okay, and then we might as well get started. Hello, everyone, and a good day. This is Julian from the Great State Mural, Mongolia Portrayed, our bi-weekly podcast that analyzes current developments, deeper structures, and the joys of contemporary Mongolia. Now in our second season, meaning that we've offered more than 30 episodes during the first year of our existence, and we're pushing on. Who else is here today? Who are you, Anand?
My name is Anand Tomurtala. I'm a journalist based in Ulaanbaatar, Mongolia.
Fantastic. Today we have a very special guest. We've got Simon Wickham-Smith with us here. Simon's not only a good friend, but he really is the foremost scholar and the only translator of contemporary Mongolian literature into English. So he is an expert on a vast area of contemporary Mongolian life. I am speaking, and I think this holds for Anand as well. We are sort of enthusiastic literature consumers, but we are not, Anand probably more than me, but we're not particularly knowledgeable on the literary scene, other really than through Simon's work. We've had a previous episode 25, where we talked to Kip Hutchins about musical practices, traditional musical practices. So we've delved into cultural production in the past, but today we want to turn to literature and literary history. Simon, do you want to tell the audience who you are, what you do, how you got to be a literature scholar and translator of Mongolian prose and poetry?
Well, yeah. Thank you, Julian. Thank you, Anand. And so as you've announced, my name is not so important to repeat it, maybe. So I'm, how did I get into it? I can't remember. It's so long ago. Well, I was a Tibetan Buddhist monk. I learned Tibetan. I learned Mongolian for fun, kind of. And then my first degree is in English literature, and in the late 90s, I was researching a book about the sixth Dalai Lama and his Tibetan poetry, and I came across Danzan Ravsha's name, Danzan Ravsha being one of the primary reincarnate lamas and literary figures of the first half of the 19th century. And a very, very long story short, I managed to get hold of his complete works, and I used those to teach myself how to translate Mongolian. So Danzan Ravsha is my Mongolian language teacher. And over time, maybe, 7 or 8 years, I went back to this translation again and again and again and redid it and tried to get it into something approaching an intelligible and interesting shape. And then eventually I decided to write to Mongolia, of some random Mongolian that I found on the internet, who seemed to be vaguely interested in literature. And his name was Mindoyo, who turned out to be one of the most important writers, particularly poets, latterly novels, but at that time he was much more of a poet and cultural figure. And he extremely generously invited me to Mongolia. And, the rest is history, which sounds like a horrendous cliche, but it's actually true because, he and the people that I've met through him are really the means by which I have gotten this notoriety, reputation, however you want to put it, as the literary scholar, Mongolian literature scholar. It does appear that I may be the only one translating into English, and so I think we've now got three commercially available books of translation of modern Mongolian literature. And Yeah, I mean, I've just been doing this because I love it. I remember, Julian, you told me not to get an independent individual PhD, and I ignored it, and it hasn't actually made any difference. I mean, I have something approaching a real job at Rutgers where I teach people how to write. And yeah, I mean, this Mongolian studies, literature studies. There is something in Europe. I think in Germany there are some people working on the literature, and in the Czechia or Czech Republic, whatever we call it now, and in Hungary too, I think in Poland, and of course in Mongolia. But no, there's no one in the English-speaking world who's actually studying or translating Mongolian contemporary literature. I think there are people doing epics and Natsagdorj and things like that, but nothing like the kind of thing I do. So, I'm the best and the worst.
I'll go for the best, Simon.
Yeah, I think I prefer that, but I can't just say I'm the best, right?
I actually like the cliche of and the rest is history, because that was my experience, right? Sort of a bit of interest and then an opportunity to go visit and connecting to community that has been part of my community since then for sort of scholarly purposes, which is I think very similar to literary circles. You just mentioned sort of some of the literary interest in Germany. I mean, this has been one of the interesting things. As you know, I've moved back to Germany, and that's given me, I could have before, but it's just given me easier access to some of the East German translations that exist of Mongolian literature. And so I've been able to read more than previously, although a good chunk of those are retranslations from the Russian. But there are significant works that have been translated. And that sort of gets us to some of the things we want to talk about today. And it's a little driven by anniversaries. Because it's a bit over 100 years now since the Mongolian Revolution, and that event, the commemoration of that event, was overshadowed to some extent by COVID, but was not actually as significant as one might have thought. In some ways, 800 years of Genghis Khan was more of an event more than a decade ago than the 100-year anniversary of the revolution. But to understand, and I think for all of us who work on contemporary Mongolia, of course, we also look to history. And just before or right around the 100-year anniversary, and you surely concluded the work before then, you published a book called Politics and Literature in Mongolia from 1921 to 1948. And that's roughly 5 years ago by now. And it's such a, it's been so enjoyable to read, but also so eye-opening for me to get a sense at all of this period that still baffles me in many ways. And one of the questions that's always stayed in my mind and that I don't really receive strong answers for, and I think we probably agree a little bit in the perspective, but the Mongolian scholarship, the historical scholarship, continues to adopt the line that was really the sort of state official line, as the glorious revolution being a popular and a socialist uprising, right? That has this two strong aspects, is that it was driven to some extent by popular support, and it was really an ideological choice that was made at the time. You have also, in your book, at various places, you've talked about this a fair bit, and you've towards the end, you have sort of a sentence that has stuck with me as a conclusion, which is that the ideological, theoretical version of a socialist revolution revolves around class. But then you write, class is not an especially helpful way to analyze the dynamics of a nomadic society. So what happened? How is there a revolution in 1921? And then, of course, after that, we'll get into the literary part as well. But maybe just a little bit first, because you've looked at this through literature. What happened? What's the revolution about?
Yeah. Well, Your question is really interesting, simply because Mongolia was the second country, so the second socialist country or communist country, depending on your perspective. But they had at the end of the Qing in 1911, they'd gotten autonomy, and they were ruled by the Bogd at this time. And then my history is a little bit scratchy, but in 1919, the Chinese installed a warlord to oversee Mongolia. I think they wanted to basically capture Mongolia and make it more of Chinese space. And the Mongolians, understandably, didn't want their autonomy to be overrun by the Chinese, right? So, because they're in a kind of a sandwich between China and the Soviet Union, they decided to petition Lenin for assistance through the Red Army. And at that time, there were two groups. There was a group that simply wanted independence from China and to continue the autonomous Mongolia. But there was another more progressive, socialistic, progressive group. And they came together and they went to Moscow, and Lenin said that he would support them. And this is a very big trope in art and, to some extent, the literature in subsequent decades. And, the result of that was that the Red Army came and overrun the White Army of Baron Ungen von Sternberg, who meanwhile had seized Urga, or what came to be called Ulaanbaatar, and themselves had overthrown this Chinese warlord. So now this crazy Russian military person was his forces were overthrown, and the Red Army basically in the first half of 1921 they created Mongolia with the assistance of those people and their associates who had gone to Moscow, and Mongolia became in, I forget, maybe July of 1921, became the second socialist state. No one was polled. No one was asked to vote. No one had any say. And, if those of us who have been to Mongolia and who have been out in the countryside know that even today, infrastructure is not super sophisticated. And if you imagine, like 1921, asking, going around the country asking people, would you like a socialist state or do you want what you've got? That wasn't really feasible. And also, if you consider that nomadic herding is kind of like a circular movement between 1, 2, 3, 4 places every year, nomadic communities just go round in their own area and they nomadize, they nurture their livestock. They just live where they are. And so subsequently, there wasn't really much of a feeling that Mongolia needed to be socialist, I think, among the general population. This came from a very small group of people who were trying to have some kind of more progressive culture, and who wanted Mongolia to be an autonomous, independent country. Right?
As I was, when I was growing up, the main the argument for why we got independence is one of the reasons was that we were a feudalist country. We had, as you said, had lords ruling over people, and they were very much. The argument was that they were very much harsh and didn't give voice to the people, and that socialism and communism, and socialism and communism kind of helped squelch that and bring about more of an equal society to Mongolia. That was the main argument that as I was growing up, as I was learning about the history of Mongolia during the 1920s was the key factor and why we became socialist. Do you agree with that, or was there a different story?
Yeah, I think that's a really that's a good point, and it kind of I think the point that you're making, Anand, was one of the main justifications that were put forward by these 7 Mongolians who went to Moscow to talk with Lenin. Sukhwata and Tribelson and a bunch of others whose name I probably forget now. So then, but what happened in the literature? In the period covered by this book that you referred to, Julian, I think I'm trying to explain how literature and politics worked together for their own mutual benefit. And one of the important things at the beginning was, in fact, to convince normal, regular people, that they should really want to be socialist, that they should really want to follow, I don't know whether it's true Marxism, Leninism, I suspect probably not, but they wanted to follow at least Moscow. So, first of all, the most important point that I would make is that the majority of Mongolians were illiterate, and so the way to do this was through drama. So very early, a lot of small drama troops went round Mongolia and started performing plays.
Right? Theater nomads, one might say.
Yes, theatre nomads. Yeah, and these theatre nomads were sort of groups from UB, but also they were, when they got to different areas of Mongolia, they would probably recruit locals who were interested in drama, right? Who, for whatever reason, were interested in acting and in maybe stagecraft. And they would put on probably pretty ramshackle plays, and very, if we look at it nowadays, somewhat simplistic plays about how terrible the feudal monastic period was and how wonderful the socialist period is, right? So, there was this other question that you were asking me, Julian, before about whether the people actually were supportive. Even it's not so much did they want it, but when they got it, were they supportive of it? And I think there is this kind of conversion literature that we find in Soviet literature. For instance, Tikhidon, I think it's been translated quietly flows the Don or something like that. The Silent Don is a really good example of that, where the main character, Grigori Melachev, I think, goes backwards and forwards between the reds and the whites, and many of the other hangers-on in the character list also go through these kind of changes. And in Mongolia, it's a little bit, I mean, again, it's a rather simplistic way of thinking about it. But we have characters who start off in drama and in stories, who start off not convinced and who go through some kind of trauma, some kind of terrible experience, and who come out the other end and they're very proactively in support of the revolution. So I think when you asked me this, I had really no idea. I kind of spent a day thinking about this, and I think that's really the example that I would give. The idea of conversion, I think, probably was much wider spread than we might imagine. Because, the whole discourse is that the entire country wants to be socialist. But I think it's very, very, very unlikely that that was the case. Because I don't think people were particularly politically turned on. They were obviously really concerned about their own safety and their own survival, and they didn't want local nobles and local monastic communities to tax them or to hurt them or their families. But beyond that, I don't think they were particularly concerned whether it was socialism or capitalism or whatever. Monarchism. So the writers, I think, felt the need to write these kind of conversion narratives in order to encourage people to at least think about whether, if they had doubts, at least to think about these doubts. And remember that in a largely non-literate society, you don't read because you can't read. You don't open a book or a newspaper and read for yourself and then close it and go away and think. The guy who can read in your group, that is the person who reads this text to you, or maybe a whole group of maybe this was like 20 or 30 people they were reading to, and then presumably they would have a discussion. And so sorry, and then there would be sort of a group consciousness development and also the individual consciousness development. And eventually, when the benefits began to appear to the extent that they did, then they would decide, are these practical benefits the kind of things that we want?
As a child, I remember there was a movie. It was in black and white. It was basically like very much a socialist propaganda. I forgot what the movie was called, but the story usually goes like there's a group of people, like a family, like a herder family. Their child is kind of sick, and then they would go to a shaman, and then the shaman would not be able to actually do anything, and then they would go to a lama or a Buddhist lama, and then they would like do like things and stuff like that, and there they wouldn't be able to do it. And there was like a person like a Red Army person who would say like, oh, you need to go see the doctor or like the nurse Nino or whatever from Russia. They'll give you the medicine. They'll help your child. But the mother like refuses. Oh, these are people who are from the north. They're not here to help us. And then eventually the child just gets really sick, and then she gives in and takes her child, and then miraculously the kids gets healed because they've administered the the Western medicine, and I think the storyline goes like how basically the help of the Russians, Mongolians were able to cure a lot of ailments that we had, which is true, but it's also, I feel like it was a strong propaganda piece to push. Do you think it was a strong propaganda piece to have people accept Russia's involvement in Mongolia? And aside from that, these playwrights, one of them were we all know is Natsagdorj, which I think is the reason we have you on here, is that it is his 120th birthday anniversary, and he is like one of the main figures of, well, a lot of Mongolians see him as the father of modern literature, and we also see him as one of the people who kind of suffered because of the socialist tyrannical and draconian rule. But if you look at the history, he was very much part of the socialist and the communist propaganda apparatus. Is that right?
Yeah. Yes. I mean, I'll come on to. I mean, the Natsagdorj is a nice segue here because he was very. He wrote a lot of journalistic and poetic pieces about health, and he had been in Germany during the Weimar period and had read a lot about prostitutes and maybe encountered some prostitutes too. So he knew a lot about personal hygiene and health, which Mongolians were not at that time particularly up with. But I would say, this narrative that you were talking about is a really important narrative in a number of plays. I'm thinking particularly of this play by Namdag, the writer who went to Germany with Natsagdorj and with other people, one of the students who was sent to Germany in the late 20s. And he wrote this play called Amidrelin Un, so the value of life, life's worth, life's value, something like that. And that the narrative that you've just outlined is exactly the narrative of this drama. But there are also other stories and dramas in which Russian doctors and Russian nurses play a very powerful role in the curing of a character. I'm thinking also of a slightly later. So Emdrelin Un was like 1935, and I'm thinking of another one by another writer whose name I forget who it's by, but it's called Minisa Gulinhan, so my school fellows, and it's about how this young girl, one of the school children, the school friends of the writer, how this young girl falls sick, and she's kind of like at death's door, and she is cured by a Russian female doctor. So we have very much. I think it might be propaganda, but it might also. Oh, really? Yeah. I can't remember who it's by. I'm kind of thinking it might be Chimid, Chechimid, but I'm not 100% sure. It's in the book. So anybody who wants to find out should buy my book. And then, Natsagdorj, having been to Germany, was really interested in trying to help Mongolia improve its healthcare. And he wrote a lot of short journalistic pieces largely about health and particularly about syphilis, which seemed to have been a theme at this time. But also he wrote this really interesting dialogue between him as the journalist and two old men outside a hospital. And if I remember rightly, one of the old men says, I'm kind of sick, I need to go and get better. And the journalist says, well, you can go into the hospital. And they say, well, I don't have any money, and I don't have any food to offer, and I don't even have offering scarves. It's kind of a Buddhist comment, right? And the journalist says, oh no, you don't need anything of that. The state provides it for free. Our glorious revolutionary state will cure you entirely. And so he goes into hospital and presumably he's cured. So this kind of half fiction narrative, half journalistic presentation is really quite a powerful way that Natsagdorj engages with healthcare. And I think the impression that one might get is that Mongolia was full of Russian, Soviet doctors and nurses bringing Russian and Soviet medicine to Mongolia's population. But I think probably the actuality was rather more haphazard than that. And maybe it was in UB that it was happening, and maybe the hospitals were not so bad, but not in the countryside.
So come up, Simon, as a person and as a writer, but also as a propagandist of sorts. And so this is the other contemporary link, right? Is that last year was the 100-year anniversary of this group that he was a member of, that came to Weimar Germany, brokered by the trade unions. And I think later this year there'll be a plaque unveiled in Leipzig to commemorate all this. So tell us a little bit more about Natsagdorj as a writer, as a person, in his links to politics, but also about this group of Mongolians that arrives in 1925 in Weimar Germany, surely to a bit of a surprise and a shock to their life world, I imagine.
Right, yeah. So Natsagdorj was born in 1906 into a relatively educated family. His father was a scribe, so he learnt how to read and write quite an early age. He also
scribe means at a monastery, yeah?
No, he was a government.
Okay.
He wrote, I guess he wrote for the autonomous government.
Okay.
But maybe he had been trained as a monk when he was very young. That's a really interesting question. I don't know the answer to that. But no, he was involved in the autonomous government. And so he was born just outside Urga, Ulaanbaatar. And he studied, I think he knew Manchu. I suspect he probably knew Manchu. And he learned Russian. And he studied in St. Petersburg, or Leningrad as it was, in the early 1920s. And then in I think it was 1926 actually, that this group of 45 Mongolian students, most of them around 13, 14, 15, and he was a little bit older, he was around 20, went to Berlin. And he wrote a poem, a narrative poem called From Ulaanbaatar to Berlin, Ulaanbaatar's Berlin, in 1927. And this told the story, told kind of like a diary of the movement from Mongolia through Russia, from Moscow over the Baltic Sea to Szczecin, and then down to Berlin. It's not the world's most exciting piece of poetry, but it actually is very interesting as a piece of journalism, and also the idea that this was the first time that he had seen beyond Moscow, for sure. Because he actually says, I'm coming back to Moscow, and then he went and hung out with some friends for a few days in Moscow. But then he went to Germany, and that was the first time he'd seen further west in Europe. And he went to Germany. He went actually with another writer called Chimid, who came back, not Che Chimid, whom I mentioned earlier, but Dugarin Chimid, who was also really interested in Western culture. And he actually renamed himself Chimid Dugarin in the European manner. And this is how he signed a lot of his writings. He was eventually taken to Moscow in 1930 and shot. But in 1926, these 45 kids went to Berlin, including Namdijk, who I mentioned earlier, and Nawan, who was another writer. They all went and really hung out and got educated, well, a little bit of education in the late 1920s, and saw Weimar Germany. So if you imagine the kind of the culture shock was really quite dramatic, I suspect, because Mongolia was it's quite a socially conventional, traditional culture, and you go to these reviews with half-naked women dancing around, and you read a lot of, there's the beginnings of homosexual literature, and all the beginnings of film, which is really, really important at that time, and the Gothic, Murnau and filmmakers like that. So the amazing sort of cultural influences that they all received, and then when they came back in 1929, after Stalin closed off the internationalism of that was developed in the 1920s, and ordered everybody to go back to Mongolia. They all came back, and they all had all this sort of ideas and information about Weimar Germany, and people like Natsagdorj needed to find a way to express this. And I think to some extent you see this in these narratives about healthcare, because in one of the key movements, I think, that really appealed to Natsagdorj, although I have no evidence for this, it's what I think, was the Neue Sächlichkeit movement, kind of journalistic literature in which everything was very much factual based, and trying to raise journalism to some kind of art, and also to really present life as it was lived rather than as a kind of romantic pretense. And so things like these health narratives were really important and were published in the newspapers or in Yunan and other Mongolian newspapers. And so in the early 30s, he began to have some kind of uncertainty about the system. Why was this? I really don't know. We know that at the new year of 1931-1932, he made rather derogatory comments at a party about at a party, a fun party, a New Year party. He made derogatory comments about the capital P party. And because of that, he was arrested subsequently and put in prison for, I think, 7 or 8 months, after which he was released, exonerated. But yeah, I think that period in prison and the kind of absurdity of arresting someone on the basis of what was probably a kind of drunken rant. I think possibly that had an effect on his way of understanding, his perception maybe of what it really meant for Mongolia to be ruled basically from Moscow. And so he, although it's not really in the literature explicitly, he seemed quite jaded and unhappy. And his wife and daughter, his wife was called Nina Chistakova, and she was from Leningrad, and his daughter, Anand, they were sent back to Moscow, actually, in 1932, 33, I think. And he started drinking very heavily. And he was kind of pursued by the government, criticized, and he was one of the few really significant writers of the time who were not arrested and tried and executed by the state. He died of a heart attack, probably brought on by excessive drinking, in July 1937. So, yeah, so young, only 31. And, at the time of his 50th anniversary of his birth in 1956, that's when he got the official title of Ich Natsagdorj, or Great Natsagdorj, and he was also made the father of modern Mongolian literature. And it seems to me that the reason why he, of all of these writers, was made the father of Mongolian literature, if they were actually looking for such a person, was that he wasn't arrested. He was kind of untainted, right? Like Lenin and Sukhwata were untainted. They both died very soon after the revolution, whereas Stalin and Chaibalsan were tainted by circumstance and by, violence and murder and Natsagdorj's colleagues like Boyanemek and Ayush and Yadamsuren, they were all executed, and people like Dandansuren and Rinchen, who were also really great writers, arguably maybe better than Natsagdorj in some ways, definitely on the same level. They had already been put in prison. I mean, Natsagdorj was put in prison, but he was officially exonerated. And obviously it was not a really big deal. He probably just swore about the government. But, Rinchen and Dandansuren were in a different league of resistance. That's the kind of overview of his life.
The mission to Germany, this group of 35 Mongolians, Simon, was they were sent, right? I'm sure Natsagdorj, because he was a bit older and had studied in the Soviet Union, maybe a bit different, but as a group, this was a government program, a reconnaissance mission, if you will, right? To learn about modern industry. Most of the group ended up in apprenticeships in various crafts or companies.
Right. Yeah.
But he is a little bit different in that group, isn't he?
Yeah. I suspect there was a lot of, there was probably a lot of pressure from certain people. I mean, it wasn't a grant application, right? An internship application. It wasn't tremendously fair, probably. But I think so it was organized initially by Eden Batchan, who was the education minister, and Ishdorj, whose role I forget, but he was, I think he was the one who went backwards and forwards to Germany. And they were kind of just government operatives who were working on the basis that during the 1920s, Mongolia was looking outward, like you say, Julian. That they were looking for a way to educate the best and the brightest, of which Natsagdorj was definitely one. And that was the way they tried to do that. There was also talk of sending to France some kids and to the United Kingdom, and also I think to the United States too, but none of those developed. I think that was a long-term plan. But as soon as Stalin gave his speech at the 1928 Soviet Party Congress and closed down all this internationalism and started what was later described in Mongolia as the leftward turn, leftward deviation is the term they use. As soon as that happened, all this was cancelled and everybody came back. So maybe they got like 2 or 3 years of education. So they had language, they had German, although we understand that Natsagdorj's German was not great. But presumably the ones who had actually gone to high school in Germany knew German pretty well. And maybe, I don't know, maybe even learnt some English or some French. So they had some access to not only the Weimar Republic, which was kind of like the most exciting and most progressive part of Europe at the time, but also they had access to maybe a little bit of literature from other countries, a little bit of culture from other countries. And they had also the kind of social progressiveness, progressiveness, right? That some of the first revolutionaries had wanted for Mongolia at the time of the 1921 revolution. So they all came back, and so during the 1930s, when not only in Germany but Mongolia also moved towards a kind of authoritarian state, these progressive ideas, these broad cultural ideas, the outlets into which these ideas were fed were interesting and various, but not with a tremendously obvious immediate development. Maybe in the 40s and the 50s, there was more industry, more engineering, possibly. But people like who the three writers, Namdag and Nawanyund and Natsagdorj. Interesting, they all begin with the letter N, so maybe it was kind of like a list of people, and they just said, okay, we'll take these three who begin with N.
I noticed the three universal ends. Simon, we do three universals for the episodes, and so maybe it's the three universal ends.
And there was also a lexicographer whose name Seville, who went, and he made the primary Mongolian dictionary. But on the whole, they were all what we might describe now as STEM students, kind of engineering, science. And so their ability was fed into the development of Mongolia over the next 20, 30, 40 years. Yeah. It was a period of tremendous great change, but the crackdown at the end of the 30s and I've forgotten the term now, but basically the personality cult of Tribalism and what that meant for the country kind of stifled a lot of this potential. Yeah. Sorry, Anand, what were you going to say?
Well, there's a lot of narrative around how Natsagdorj became the father of modern literature. A lot of the for me, Natsagdorj's writing has always seemed to be timeless. Almost, I remember as a kid reading all these like poems and writings of all the from Natsagdorj and other people, but Natsagdorj's writing always like stuck with me because it seemed to get into the head of what a Mongolian actually feels and what a Mongolian actually goes through. Like one of the first writings that I've ever read was the Son of the Old World, Hochuhu,
The Old World, right?
which was for me was like one of the most eye-opening literatures that I've ever read because it kind of, even though he wrote it way back in the 30s, it still spoke with me because like the things the things he points out was still true when I was a kid in the 90s of how like a bunch of old men gather around like an area and talk about politics and things that are far beyond them and like young men going around all these gears and trying to get like a small piece of food like few dairy foods, and basically how we were like basically sheltered within like a cauldron, and then there's like a little glimpse of light where I guess the new revolution of the Soviets and the communism comes in, which is those kind of writings like really resonated with me, and also again, for me, the when I look back on his writing, it was the prose were quite short, and the sentences were quite short, and it was to me it was very similar to like maybe like Western writing almost. Like if you for a lot of Mongolian writing, it's like very long. The sentence just like goes on. It's like almost two, three, 4 lines of sentence. But what Natsagdorj just was like maybe like 9 word sentences and had really good alliterations and like descriptions for me. And again, like for me, like reading the Tears of the Venerable Lama.
Oh yeah,
and also what was it of the Black Cave or something? It seems as though that he was very much like the opposite sex a lot in terms he would visualize a lot of the women in his lives in a very how would I say this, like a visual context. Like he would and a lot of the talks was that he lost his first wife because he was a womanizer, and maybe he lost his second wife not because she was sent away, but because he was actually just perusing. He was indulging himself with in his youth of going around and not settling, not taking care of his wife.
Right.
Yeah. For me, basically, his writing was like short and really spoke to people of Mongolia now. Like other writers, they would just comment on things that they were wrong, but him was like he would like get into your head, basically. Like he would give you a visual sense that how a Mongolian basically felt. Maybe for me, the other writers, Rinchun would be like, "Oh, this is happening. Maybe this is wrong," and he would just comment on it. But Natsagdorj would, in a sense, would give you a feeling of how you felt almost as a Mongolian. Maybe for me that's why the title of the founding father of Mongolian literature stands compared to other writers.
That's really interesting. Yeah, thank you. So it's really interesting to me as a non-Mongolian who works with this to actually listen to what Mongolian readers bring to this.
I'm not an avid Mongolian literature reader in a sense. That's why.
No, but you're a Mongolian.
Yeah, that's true. That's
halfway
true.
there, right?
Yeah. Like for me, like I hated reading a lot of the Mongolian writing, but for me, like Natsagdorj's writing was just always it's always easy to read. Always like just captures me. Always gets into my head. In a sense, unlike the other writers. There was like a few other writers who did capture that, but it was after that, maybe in the 80s. But for the... I'm really struck by your insight into sentence length. Because I had never thought of that. And that's really... That's something to really consider. And I think that might be something that he got from Germany, maybe?
Germany.
No, certainly not from German. No short sentences in German.
No.
Not an export item.
No. I was thinking of the Natsagdorj, the kind of simplistic. Simplicity of short sentences.
And the quasi-journalistic intent, right, in the description and capturing sort of contemporary developments.
Yes. And I would also say, I think Lambergen Nullum's the Tears of the Monk's Tears. Venerable Lama's Tears, yes. That opens with a quite a long paragraph.
Yes, it does. Yeah.
But this paragraph is truly the most elegant piece of writing. I've read quite a lot in English too, and I've never come across something which is so simple,
yes,
yet so telling.
Yes.
Right? And I wish I had a copy here. I would read it, but it's basically a parallel structure where from Ganden Monastery, the venerable monk is coming down from Ganden, wearing his robes and thinking this and that.
Yeah.
And from the other direction, from the Chinese Quarter,
smelly,
where she's probably been working, this prostitute is coming down, wearing her clothes, thinking her thoughts. There is so direct parallelism here, and you already know by the end of that first paragraph. You basically know everything that's going to happen. It's kind of intuitive, but it's not intuitive because it's right there in the language, the structure. There's a kind of irony in the structure that Natsagdorj shows basically the entire development of this rather unfortunate story.
Yeah.
Only in this beautiful, beautiful paragraph. Yeah, it's a piece of genius writing.
Yeah, it is. But to the listeners who don't know the story, is that basically there's a lama and he gets like coerced by this prostitute from the Chinese Quarter, and then says like his mother is basically sick, and you're like read the hymn or something, and then basically he falls in love with this prostitute, and basically gives all the things that he has to this prostitute. But after a while, the prostitute takes in another lover who's maybe like younger, and then he's like really mad, and at the end the lama basically kind of loses everything to just giving to this.
He loses everything.
Yes, yeah. Which is kind of sad and very poetic at the same time. Just
Simon, I like very much sending listeners off with a link and opportunity. Where can they find the story?
That's
the
really
opening
interesting
paragraph, but ideally the whole story of the Tears of the Venerable Monk.
Well, I can send it to you and you can put it up.
No, but if we tell people where to find it, they probably will too. You've translated it, right?
I have, but it's I'm not sure where it is. I mean, it's on my computer. I don't know whether I've actually published it. It's definitely been published in a Mongolian publication, but the likelihood of people being able to get hold of that is difficult. Very, very small.
There is a link on the National University of Mongolia in English.
We'll include that in the show notes, listeners. So you've got a bit of a homework and an opportunity to follow, to check on Simon's judgment here of the elegance of this paragraph.
Well, hopefully it's been translated by someone who recognizes, yes, elegantly.
I would add a small piece, which is that this group of young people in the 20s that came to Germany also is to some extent the foundation that the Mongolian East German relationship is built on, right? Because after World War II, as socialism is established in East Germany, this draws on union connections between Mongolia and East Germany, and so what we still see today is a relatively close link between Germany and Mongolia, at least within countries in Europe, is built on some of this history as well, which is part of the reason why there's a bit of interest in Natsagdorj in Germany as well. And so we'll see this fall, as I mentioned, I think there'll be a plaque unveiled, and then there'll be a little bit of an event around that to commemorate this as well. And so it's been terrific to learn from you, Simon, as always, and to listen to your discussion and understand a little bit more about a period of modern Mongolia that is foundational at the same time as it doesn't get very much attention from people other than you, and that raises questions about the foundation of the state and of government and the like. And so it's really been wonderful to listen to. What I take away is more marching orders to keep looking for Mongolian literature for me in translation, and to draw on some of the sideline insights that it provides. Even when it doesn't necessarily describe political context, we understand a bit more about political context by how people interact with each other, with the government, with officialdom, and with representatives of the Soviet Union as well. And so it's a powerful reminder, as much as just a great joy to listen to some of the depth of understanding you have and what it tells us about contemporary Mongolia. Anand, you can relate to some of these stories more and have a different impression as a reader, but what are you taking away?
My takeaway is I've barely scratched the surface of your book, but looking at the beginning of some of the parts, it seems like a very good read. I couldn't put it down, but basically, a lot of the times
unputdownable.
Yeah.
Seriously.
A lot of the time we as Mongolians sometimes forget that we seem to venerate people without looking at their flaws, and then feel like a lot of the times we don't really try to scratch the barrier of like history that much, like critique it as much. And maybe I feel like a lot of Mongolians, we need to really look at the things from a critical point, and also things get perspectives from like a different vantage point, and not prescribe things into one point of view. Like for Natsagdorj, a lot of the times when I was young, he was seen as basically like a hero during the socialist times, that he was like a rebel almost. But like looking back on the history, he was basically much the apparatus. He was part of it. He was part of the in group, and that's why he was sent to Germany also. And maybe he ruffled the bear, and some people don't really see it that way, and we don't really comment on the things that he was also part of the things that made it worse and maybe also better at the same time. So yeah, that's my takeaway.
Very good. Listeners, you can tell we're on to another season and hopefully another year of podcasts. We'll have occasional guests like Simon to help us figure some things out, and we'll see what happens in politics this year, whether there'll be anything worth commenting on. Simon, thank you so much for joining us here for this conversation today. I hope you have a great remainder of the summer in Mongolia. Maybe draw some literary inspiration. And we'll run into each other again in person sometime soon.
Yeah, I hope so, Julian. Thank you so much to you both for this. It's been very good fun.
Very good.